Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah.
And my name is Stella, and today we will be facilitating a tutorial on writing for climate justice. This is the very first tutorial in a three-part tutorial series where we'll be diving into writing for climate justice, how to write a good article, and how to edit and pitch your article to a publication. So thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited that you want to use writing as a tool for climate justice and activism.
Absolutely. So first things first, this tutorial is brought to you by the African Climate Alliance, a youth-led grassroots movement-based organization acting and advocating for Afrocentric climate justice. If you go back a slide, that's where you'll see me and Stella, and that's myself, Sarah Robin Farrell, and I'm the Strategic Communications and Fundraising Manager. And Stella, you are?
Yes. My name is Stella Hirtantio, and I am ACA's Communications and Storytelling Coordinator.
So we work a lot together, and you'll see more of us in the ACA writing circle. And yeah, if you want to know more about ACA, we'll talk about it at the end, but you can go to our website or follow us on social media, and we'll put those links in the description. So today we're going to cover the human rights approach to climate change and environmental justice. We're going to unpack the concept of a narrative and why writing is a powerful tool for activism. And we're also going to look at how to identify what to write about. We're also going to look at newsworthiness as a tool to get your story out and why you are the right person to tell your story and the highlights that are happening in the stories of your community or stories that highlight what's going on in your community.
Yes, exactly. And before we get started, I know this sounds like a lot, and if you feel like you want more information on these topics just to add to your base understanding around climate justice and the various intersections of it, we have a bunch of online resources on the African Climate Alliance website, which is just africanclimatealliance.org. And we also have an activist guide, which is also available on our website, which is a really great resource that covers many, many different topics, including what is climate change, what is climate justice, and what is intersectionality. So if you want to return to those at any point during the tutorial, before or after, they are there for your use. And we also have a range of video resources on our YouTube channel from previous workshops we've done, educational workshops, and they cover similar topics. So if you prefer to learn more visually or through audio, then those are there for you. And we also just encourage you to take notes during the session to help you just absorb and take in the information that we're about to share, and hopes that this will help with your learning journey.
Exactly. And I think the beauty of it is that because it's pre-recorded, you can do this at your own speed. You can press pause at any point so that you can take your notes, you can write down things. So don't feel like you have to keep up with us. We're here to go at your speed. And that's why we did this as a pre-recorded series. Okay, so let's get to the unpacking. So let's look at the human rights approach to the climate crisis. So at the African Climate Alliance, we really center our belief on the fact that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis, that it includes environmental, climate, and social issues. So this is important because it's right at the center of everything we believe, how we act, and then how we write. So we see it as a symptom of a broader context in which colonialism and capitalism has caused environmental breakdown and social injustice, especially for people who are in Africa and the global South. It's also an opportunity to address intersectional issues with Indigenous and African-led sustainable socio-environmental solutions to things like energy poverty, lack of housing, food, and water sovereignty. So no matter how bad the crisis gets, we also believe it's never too late to address it when there are so many ways to build a better world for all while simultaneously addressing these really fundamental issues that we find in our societies and our communities.
Exactly. And building on that, so that really people-centered approach to looking at these issues and how they relate to ourselves and our communities and the people around us, we at ACA also take a very Afrocentric approach. We are based on the continent, but we also center our work around solutions or climate solutions that are for most impacted communities across Africa, because we have seen the havoc that climate change is already having on the continent across many different countries and communities. And so at the core of our work, we really want to be guided by Africans, by people living in Africa, and also by indigenous knowledge.
So why did we start here? We believe that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that having a key understanding of the human rights approach to climate justice informs all of the work we do, not only when acting for the climate crisis, but also when writing about it. So we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen often in the Western-dominated media that many of us are regularly exposed to, that people and environmental issues are still separated or are not well connected. And so we invite you to join us in using writing as a means to challenge this narrative and to connect those dots in every writing piece that you do about the climate.
So I wanted to leave this question on the screen just as, I guess, food for thought as we go through the rest of the session, because as Sarah and I have been speaking, this first tutorial is also just about probing what a good story is, what helps you when you're reading an article, what prompts you to action, what creates this sense of inspiration, what changes your mind, because I'm sure that we all have at least one example of an article that has really hit home for us, like we felt it in our hearts and our minds. We read ideas that we thought, wow, that's really put words to the thoughts that I've had or my lived experience, and has either driven you to action, to join a protest, to sign a petition, to speak about these issues in the world, or inspired you to join a group like African Climate Alliance, or to make you think about things a little bit differently. So I'm leaving this question here as a point of reflection, just so that you can think about the types of articles that resonate with you as you start to begin to think about the types of articles that you would want to write. And I think that what I'm really talking about here is our stories, and we're using this word narrative. So what do we mean by narrative? A narrative is basically another word for a story that we want to tell and how we piece it together. So it's what connects the dots. And in our tutorials, we're going to be focusing on non-fiction activist writing, but we also want to note that fiction writing can also be used as a tool for activism. So what's the difference between the two? You may have heard these terms before. We talk about them often, but even I need a reminder sometimes. So the narrative in fiction is not based on actual events or facts. When you talk about fiction, we're really talking about a story that weaves together ideas and plot lines that are entirely made up. They can be based on reality, but they're not a true story. It's not a true story of a specific person's life. It may be based on their life, but it's, there are parts that you have made up or imagined that you're adding. Whereas non-fiction writing is firmly grounded in reality. So this is a story about actual historic events, about biographies of people that exist or existed. It's about scientific explanations or any kind of factual reporting. So fiction is the made up, and non-fiction is stories that are very much based on real events and real people. And they both have narratives, but we are going to be focusing on non-fiction activist writing.
And I know when I first learned this, I was always like, why did they say fiction for the not true and non-fiction for the true? So I always think of it as, not true is fiction, and then non-fiction is the not true, which is like, it can be confusing, but I think that they chose it, so we have to go with it.
Yes, I don't think we need to remember the terms to the T, because I often forget them. But I guess it's just to say that we're writing from lived experience and from things that have actually happened. We're not, making up stories about the climate in this specific space, although, you often read things that change your heart and mind that are fictional.
Exactly, and they very much have their place. So building our own narratives while considering a broader socio-political context and using facts, very important, can challenge people's opinions. It can help build awareness, and ultimately it can help us to build a more connected grassroots climate justice movement. So the points there, talking about not only building our own narratives based on truth and real experience, but also looking at the broader socio-political context and importantly, using facts. So we encourage you here to pause the video and maybe write down 2 to 3 article ideas that draw on your own narratives of the climate crisis. So maybe think about something that you've witnessed, something that's happened to you, something that's happened to people around you in your community, in your society, and what is something you would want to draw attention to and write about.
Exactly. So once you've paused the video and you've done all of that reflection and idea creation, we want to touch a bit on how non-fiction activist writing is a key way of building a narrative. So we're going to share an example in a little bit, but just to give you some context, non-fiction activist writing can take many different forms. When we build narratives, this includes things like essays, things like articles, books, reports, and also investigative journalism. And for our tutorials, we'll be focusing on articles called op-eds, which we'll touch on more in the next session, but you all joined this writing circle knowing that we will be focusing on op-ed writing because ACA has a long history with creating collaborative op-eds, and that's really why we're all here to collaborate and share our ideas and experiences and build that into one narrative. So just to give you a bit of context before we get to an example, because I know we've been talking a lot and sometimes it's easier to understand these things when you're looking at an example, but just for an idea of how does non-fiction activist writing build a narrative to change minds and contribute to a movement? Because you might be wondering, okay, this is all great. We know about the difference between fiction and non-fiction, about narrative, but what does this contribute to the climate justice movement? So here are just a few ways. So it does this by organizing information in a clear and structured way. And this is essential for presenting facts, arguments, and ideas. So you're offering people new ways of thinking in a way. Then it's also really important because it incorporates storytelling techniques to humanize issues and make them more relatable. Often when it comes to climate change, these issues feel abstract, but when we talk about lived experience and things that are actually happening on the ground, it makes these topics a little bit more human. Then thirdly, we're using language to present arguments in a compelling manner. So that's also going back to the first point and saying that you're creating all these linkages between facts and lived experience to create an argument for whatever you're writing about, perhaps the reality of the climate crisis on the continent. Then fourth, this kind of writing is strategically framing issues to highlight specific aspects, shaping narrative to align with their goals. So like Sarah was saying earlier, connecting climate to social and economic issues as well. Next, connecting political issues to values that resonate with readers. Again, these very big abstract contexts that we hear about when political leaders speak or when we read the news, but really adding a human element to that. Then we're also presenting information in a way that shows urgency and importance. Because as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure we've all read something in our lives that motivates us to take action. And this is why we also are writing and creating this writing circle, to inspire people to action. Next, we're also exposing wrongdoing, inequality, or systemic issues. And this is really important because writing is a way to speak truth to power. We can use our words to really highlight injustices that are happening, to show how those injustices are connected to other injustices, because we know that all systems of oppression are connected as well. So it's creating the systemic view of issues in the world and how we can create shared solutions. Next, we are relying on well-researched information, credible sources, and evidence. And this is really, really important when it comes to nonfiction activist writing, because you want people to take you seriously. And to do this, we have to make sure that our writing is grounded in information, incredible sources, and evidence. And that doesn't always look like research on the internet. Lived experiences and the way we move through the world is also a very credible source of information. So it's not to say that storytelling isn't a big part. It's just to say that we need to make sure we're not slipping into the realm of fiction or, the imaginary. Then we are also acknowledging and addressing counter-arguments to demonstrate intellectual honesty. So I like to think of this as, think about the questions that your reader might be asking when they're reading your article, or in a sense, playing devil's advocate. So you're also addressing things that might be the counter-argument to your article, just to show that you're, well-researched, you've considered many options, and this is the argument that you're making. Then we're going beyond highlighting problems and offering potential solutions. So, these kinds of articles are really action-based. We want the reader to come out not just with a sense of, okay, this is what's going on in the world and these problems are very complex, but also, okay, this is what I can do. This is how I can help. This is how I can take action. And this is how I can be a part of the movement for change. Then second last, we're including a call to action, urging readers to participate in movements, engage in activism, or support specific policies, which is what I just touched on as well. And then very lastly, we're contributing to movement building by fostering alliances and coalitions. For example, writing a shared piece across organizations and across movements. And in this case as well, in the case of the Writing Circle, across many different countries. And I think there's such a strength in pulling together different people's experiences and thoughts and perspectives into one shared narrative. So I will put an example on the screen now. And Sarah, would you like to talk us through a little bit of it?
Absolutely.
Let me just...
I can also share it on my side here. There, got it. No worries. So we're having a look at this op-ed here, Our Planet, Their Sacrifice, Ensuring Safety for Environmental Defenders and Activists. So this is something that was written by the ACA team in response to something that we saw happening with regards to some of the EACOP protesters, or the Stop EACOP protesters who were arrested. So something that's very important here is your heading. So often the actual title of your piece is incredibly important in gripping your readers and outlining what you're going to talk about. They don't have to be long, shorter the better, but something that is catchy is usually very useful. The next thing that's important is when you have a introduction. So often these kinds of articles will have a kind of summary paragraph that can be written right at the end once you've written the whole piece, that encapsulates or captures the entire piece in one small paragraph, so that someone who reads can see title, okay, cool, I know what I'm reading about, and then something that introduces them to the overall idea of the article. From there, you would go into the piece. So, and then we can talk about some of, the points that Stella was raising earlier in some of those very good examples as to how these kinds of writings build narratives to help change minds. So when we talk about organizing information in a clear and structured way, part of that is the title, the introductory paragraph. And then it's looking at how are you going to structure your article so that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So in your end, you often will summarize, you will conclude, you will make strong points, so that what you're trying to say is very clear, or maybe you're providing a call to action or a question that you want your reader to take at heart or to do. And this sometimes can even be things like signing a petition, joining a protest. So they can be very clear calls to action that you can have in the conclusion of your paragraph or your op-ed. And then in the middle, that's where you're going to build on your narrative in terms of presenting your facts, presenting your arguments and the ideas that you want to bring across. This is also where you would incorporate your storytelling. So here you can see we spoke about very specific facts. We looked for what's it called, a published study where we know that those facts are coming from a very reputable source. And we took information on how many environmental defenders were killed between 2022 and 2012. And we did this to create a narrative of a story that's happening outside of just this one event where these EACOP protesters were arrested. So we took the examples of other community activists who unfortunately have been murdered and lost their lives to this movement in terms of the work that they have done from opposing mines. And I just also want to acknowledge that this is a difficult topic. So we have chosen an article that was difficult to write and can be difficult to read, because this is real people, these are real lives, and this is a really difficult topic, yet it is our reality and the reality of many on the front lines. And so what we did here in terms of drawing storytelling techniques and humanizing issues, we used real issues and real examples where these things have happened to different people so that we could draw connections between the point we were making at the beginning. We also looked at around the world. We looked at things that are happening in Africa. We looked at things that are also happening in other parts of the world. And how we then, after presenting these facts, say, you know, these things are not happening in isolation. And so there you can see how we've used these facts, we've drawn the dots, and we've also used language to try and present a compelling manner and also strategically frame the issue to highlight the narrative that we are trying to say. And that is when we also get into the original part of our story. Now that we've set the scene, now we're going back to looking at the original argument again that we were bringing in terms of the EACOP protesters and what more we want to say about that. Images are also another way to bring a storytelling element to your story, and also to connect political issues and present information in a way that shows urgency and importance. So sometimes the language that you use presents urgency, but sometimes also the imagery that you use. And we've learned the hard way that sometimes it is better to source your own images and present them as an option to the publication that you submit, so that they don't choose for you and end up choosing a picture that actually tells a different story. And we have seen that happen before. So I think that what we also try to do is go beyond highlighting problems and then also offering potential solutions. So further down in our piece, we talk about what are the things that we want. So here you see we have to change this and find ways to center restorative justice in these negotiations. So we were speaking a little bit about COP and how these environmental defender violence against environmental defenders was taking place at the same time as COP was happening, which in itself often doesn't create a lot of freedom of speech for activists. So we were also drawing all these points also to this kind of global action that was taking place, which also made it newsworthy because it happened at the same time that COP was happening. But importantly, my point here that I was trying to make is that we're not just stating the problem, we're also looking for what is it that we want, what are the solutions. And then at the end, we end with a call, as I mentioned earlier, a call to action. What are you asking from your reader? What do you want your reader to do? And therefore, what you're trying to do is contribute to a movement building, to an alliance building, so that people leave your story feeling affected, feeling like they want to do something, even if it's just research more about the issue. So that's, we'll also post the link to this story in the description so that you can continue to look at it as an option. I mean, I didn't want to go through it too in depth, but rather just look at it more from a structural perspective as an example, and hope that helps when you start looking at some of the ways that you want to write stories about the issues that you want to write about.
Exactly. And I think that another point to just mention is that this is not a quick process. This op-ed took quite a while to put together. I think op-eds are really about grabbing attention, as well as then presenting so much storytelling and joining so many systemic dots. But in grabbing that attention, you want to make sure that you are being as succinct as possible while still including that very emotive approach, and then also being very grounded in research and facts. So yeah, these aren't quick to write articles, and it's important for them to be in response to something, but it takes a very collaborative process to create something like this.
And also, I just want to add
go ahead.
that just to rest assured that we're going to go more in depth into what is an op-ed exactly, what are the ways that one constructs a good op-ed in a more systematic manner in the next session. So this was really kind of like just an introduction into this, and we're going to go into it more in depth, just to say, yeah.
Exactly. And also just to acknowledge something that is really important in the context of writing about climate crisis issues in Africa, which is to say that there is a level of risk involved. This level of risk about writing about these political systems, environmental systems, social systems, differs from country to country. But there is a level of risk regardless, because we are expressing thoughts and opinions on issues that can be considered, I guess, controversial by some people, but also very, very important for us to comment on. But we didn't want to just, move through this tutorial without acknowledging that, and also to say that you need to consider these risks before deciding to pitch to a specific publication and publishing your work. And one way to, I guess, lessen the risk, because it still is important for us to speak out about these things. But one way to lessen the risk is to remove your personal name from the article. So you will see at the top of this article, our names are mentioned. But if we wanted to conceal our names, a lot of people do use things called pen names, which is just a stand-in name. So it's not their actual name. It might be an alternative name that they've made up essentially to conceal their identity, because they are afraid that, perhaps somebody might read it and be able to track them down. And this is not to put you off or to make you overly scared, but just to, just to share the realities of speaking out. And it's a particularly important example that we went through right now, because the article is about the risks that come with standing up for justice and speaking truth to power. So we just wanted to say that if you are ever in a situation where you feel your climate activism has led you to be at risk or be led to security concerns, you can always email us, team@africanclimatealliance.org. We will put that as well in the description of the video, and we will do our best to support you in whatever way we can, because this is very important work and we are here to strengthen each other and provide solidarity and support. So just to note that.
Absolutely important. Thanks, Stella. So now we're actually drawing to a close of our first tutorial of this 3-part series. And so we're just going to share the main takeaways from today. So basically, we started off with the fact that we always want to take a human rights approach to the climate crisis, and that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis with roots in colonialism and capitalism, and requires an Afrocentric approach in Africa. We looked at our advocacy and writing and how it should emphasize the human rights approach while focusing on solutions that are tailored for African communities and challenges, and that challenges the dominant Western narrative that people and planet are separate issues. We then also looked at nonfiction activist writing as a crucial way of shaping narratives in climate activism. And we looked at some of those key strategies to writing that kind of work, including organizing your information, incorporating storytelling, using compelling language, strategically framing issues, connecting to values, emphasizing urgency, exposing issues, relying on research, addressing counter-arguments, offering solutions, issuing a call to action, and fostering alliances across organizations. So that's some of the key strategies that we've discussed today.
Perfect. And we wanted to end the session with a bit of a takeaway task. I think it's important that when you're learning, you're also practicing, because that's how we, really take in information that we're hearing, and start to put it into practice and see how this works in our personal capacity. So we have the following takeaway task for you, which comes in 2 parts. And as Sarah said, the nice thing about this recording is that you can rewatch it, go back to a part that you were uncertain about, and use this while you are preparing your takeaway task. But the first task, or the first part of the task, is to look at the op-ed examples in the video. We'll put the link to the one that we went through in the description, just to get a sense of how the op-ed is written and make notes of what you notice. So what do you notice about the structure, about the images we used, about even the way the images are captioned, the headline? What struck you? What part were you feeling most moved by? Just be, reflective and observant while you go through the example in your own time. And then secondly, using what you have learned about nonfiction activist writing and narrative building, take the article ideas you noted down in this session. So there was a part earlier where we said, pause the video and write down a couple of ideas. So return to those ideas, and choose 1 or 2 of those ideas. And then in bullet points, outline the main points you would want to bring across if you turn the idea into a full article. And so this is important for these tasks to be together, because the first part, to look at the op-ed example, is to note, okay, this topic was about environmental defenders, and what points did we choose to include in the article to create the story we were telling to inspire action? And so you will need to do the same thing with the ideas that you have had. What are the main points you want to convey? How are these connected to each other? And how does this, at the end of the day, prompt people to action, and to build, solidarity in the climate justice movement?
And that's that. So we hope you enjoyed the first session, and we thank you so much for your attention today. And then we will see you next time. And then again, if you aren't already following us on social media, please be sure to do so by following the links in the video description. See you next time.